I was standing beside my 10-year-old daughter Lily's hospital bed in Austin, Texas, praying she would be okay. My own sister, Jessica, had just done something unthinkable, all because I refused to give her the money we had saved for Lily's cancer treatment. She believed she could take everything from us without facing any consequences. But she had no idea that one decision was about to change her life forever and destroy everything my family had left. What happened next shocked everyone. My name is Emily Carter, and for 32 years I lived under the foolish delusion that blood meant safety. I grew up in Austin, Texas, in a beautiful, sunlit suburban home that looked picture-perfect from the outside, but inside those walls, I was a ghost. I was the invisible child, a shadow moving through the background of my own life, while my parents, Robert and Susan, built an entire universe around one single son, my younger sister, Jessica. From the moment Jessica was born, the dynamic wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. Jessica was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the baseline burden, the one who existed to make her look better. If Jessica wanted something, the world stopped until she got it. If she threw a tantrum because her birthday party wasn't grand enough, my parents would spend thousands they couldn't afford to appease her. Meanwhile, my achievements were treated like minor inconveniences. When I graduated from high school with honors, Robert barely looked up from his newspaper, and Susan complained that the ceremony took too long and made Jessica miss her dance recital. My entire childhood was a series of small, quiet heartbreaks. I wore hand-me-downs so Jessica could wear designer clothes. I stayed home to clean while they took Jessica to theme parks. I used to cry myself to sleep, asking God what I had done wrong to deserve such profound emotional neglect from the very people who brought me into this world. As I grew into my 20s, I realized that my worth in that house was strictly transactional. I was expected to be the obedient, quiet daughter who never complained, who took the scraps of affection they threw at me, and who would eventually serve whatever grand future they had planned for Jessica. Susan would openly tell me that I needed to find a high-paying job just so I could help support Jessica's artistic passions later in life. They didn't see me as a human being with my own feelings, my own dreams, or my own heart. I was just an insurance policy for their favorite child. I tolerated it for years because a part of me, that wounded, desperate little girl inside, still craved a hug from my mother, still wanted my father to look at me and say he was proud of me. I thought that if I just worked harder, if I was just sweeter and more compliant, they would finally love me. But the breaking point came when I dared to make a choice for my own happiness, a choice that had nothing to do with their golden child. I met Daniel, a kind, hard-working man who saw me when everyone else looked right through me, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly loved. But to my family, my independence was the ultimate betrayal. The day I told Robert and Susan that Daniel had asked me to marry him was the day the fragile illusion of my family permanently shattered. I remember the exact look of disgust on my mother's face. Daniel didn't come from old Texas money, and he wasn't someone who could fund Jessica's extravagant lifestyle, which made him completely worthless in their eyes. Susan didn't offer a congratulatory hug. Instead, she slammed her coffee mug onto the counter and asked how I could be so incredibly selfish. Robert stood by the window, his arms crossed, his voice cold as ice as he gave me an ultimatum. I could either break off my engagement with Daniel and remain their obedient, ATM-style daughter, or I could walk out of their door and marry him, but I would leave with absolutely nothing. They told me that if I chose Daniel, I would be dead to them. I looked at my parents, and then I looked at Jessica, who was sitting on the couch smirking, playing with her phone, completely indifferent to the fact that my life was being torn apart. In that moment, I realized they never loved me. I was just an asset to them. So, I grabbed my coat, looked my mother in the eye, and told her I was leaving. Susan screamed after me, saying that from that day forward, I was no longer their daughter. They kept their promise with a terrifying, calculated cruelty. They completely blocked my number, blocked me on social media, and instructed the rest of our extended family to treat me like a pariah. When Daniel and I got married at a small courthouse in Austin, the pews were completely empty on my side. There was no father to walk me down the aisle, no mother to help me with my dress, and no sister to stand by my side. They didn't just disown me, they erased me from their history. For 10 long years, there was absolute silence. 10 years of building a life from absolute ground zero with Daniel. We rented a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment where the heater barely worked in the winter, and we lived on instant noodles while we both worked double shifts. Daniel worked construction during the day and loaded trucks at night, while I took every clerical job I could find. We sacrificed every luxury because we were determined to build a real, safe home based on love, not transactional abuse. When I became pregnant and gave birth to our beautiful daughter Lily, my heart ached with a bittersweet pain. I held my newborn baby girl in my arms and swore an absolute oath to God that she would never, ever feel the crushing weight of neglect that I felt growing up. She would know every single day that she was wanted, loved, and protected. I secretly hoped that the birth of their first granddaughter might soften Robert and Susan's hearts. I sent a beautiful birth announcement with Lily's picture to their home address, foolishly thinking that the innocence of a child could heal a decade of hatred. A week later, the envelope was returned to my mailbox, unopened, with the words, "Return to sender, no such person at this address," scrawled across the front in my mother's unmistakable, sharp handwriting. They didn't want to know Lily. They didn't care if we lived or died. For 10 years, they didn't send a single birthday card, a text message, or a word of support. But Daniel and I kept pushing forward. We eventually bought a modest, cozy little house, saved every penny we could, and built a peaceful, beautiful world for Lily. We were happy, self-sufficient, and entirely free from their toxicity. Or so I thought, until the universe threw us into the darkest fire imaginable. Our peaceful little world came crashing down on a Tuesday afternoon. Lily had been looking unusually pale for weeks, and she kept complaining about being too tired to play in the backyard. I initially thought it was just a growth spurt or a passing school bug, but when mysterious, dark bruises started appearing all over her tiny arms and legs without her ever falling down, a deep, primal panic seized my chest. Daniel and I took her to the clinic in Austin, expecting a simple blood test and some reassurance. Instead, we were rushed to the emergency room, and within hours, a pediatric oncologist was sitting across from us in a sterile, dimly lit room. He looked at us with a heavy, somber expression and delivered the words that instantly shattered our lives into a million pieces. Lily had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive, fast-moving blood cancer. The room completely spun out of control. I remember gripping Daniel's hand so tightly my knuckles turned white while he broke down crying right next to me. Our innocent, beautiful 10-year-old girl was suddenly fighting for her life, hooked up to a web of IV lines and monitors in a cold hospital room. The doctor explained that her treatment needed to begin immediately, but the specialized chemotherapy and bone marrow monitoring costs were astronomical. Even with our basic insurance, the out-of-pocket expenses were going to be overwhelming. In that exact moment, my maternal instincts completely took over. Daniel and I didn't care about our future, our comfort, or anything else. We only cared about keeping our daughter breathing. We went into a state of absolute sacrificial survival. That same week, we put our modest house on a second mortgage. Daniel sold his beloved truck that he had meticulously worked on for years, forcing him to take the public bus to his grueling construction shifts. I sold my engagement ring, my grandmother's antique necklace, and every single piece of furniture that wasn't absolutely essential. We emptied our retirement accounts, cleared out Lily's college fund, and begged for extensions on every personal bill. Day after day, while Lily bravely endured painful spinal taps and hair-thinning chemo sessions, Daniel and I worked ourselves to the bone. I would sit by her hospital bedside with a laptop, working remote data entry shifts until 3 in the morning, watching her chest rise and fall. Through blood, sweat, and endless tears, we managed to scrape together exactly $70,000. It wasn't just money to us. It was Lily's lifeline. It was the exact amount required for her next critical phase of specialized, life-saving bone marrow therapy. We deposited it into a dedicated medical account, holding on to that balance like it was the Holy Grail. Then, on a hot Texas afternoon, while I was gently stroking Lily's bald head as she drifted off to sleep, the hospital room landline rang. It was the receptionist downstairs at the main lobby. Her voice was hesitant as she spoke. "Mrs. Carter, there are 2 women down here claiming to be your mother, Susan, and your sister, Jessica. They are demanding to come up to the oncology ward." My heart stopped. After 10 years of absolute frozen silence, my mother and sister were downstairs. A sudden, foolish wave of intense hope washed over me. I thought to myself, they found out. They know their granddaughter is dying, and they've finally come to put the past behind us and support me. I wiped a tear from my eye, told the receptionist to send them up, and stood by the door, completely unprepared for the sheer malice that was about to walk into my daughter's hospital room. The heavy wooden door of the hospital room swung open, and Susan and Jessica stepped inside. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I looked at them for the first time in 10 long years. My mother looked older, her face lined with sharp wrinkles, but her eyes held the same distant, critical coldness I remembered. Jessica stood beside her, dressed in a pristine, expensive designer outfit, smelling of heavy perfume that immediately choked the clean, sterile smell of the room. I took a step forward, my arms instinctively opening for a hug, my voice trembling as I whispered, "Mom, Jessica, you came." But neither of them moved. Susan didn't look at my tear-stained face, and she didn't offer a single word of comfort. Instead, both of them bypassed me entirely, their eyes sweeping over the room with an expression of pure discomfort and annoyance. I turned around, pointing toward the bed where my fragile, bald 10-year-old daughter lay hooked up to a complex web of life support machines and flashing monitors. "This is Lily," I said, a sob catching in my throat. "She's fighting so hard, guys. The cancer is aggressive, but the doctors say she has a chance." Jessica didn't even glance at her dying niece. Instead, she crossed her arms, checked her manicured nails, and let out a loud, dramatic sigh. "Oh, please, Emily, spare us the theatrical drama," she said, her voice dripping with venomous indifference. "We didn't drive all the way down here to look at medical equipment or listen to a sob story. We are here because we have an actual emergency, and you are the only one who can fix it." I stared at her, my mind completely short-circuiting. An emergency? My daughter was lying in an oncology bed fighting for her next breath, and Jessica was talking about her own emergency? I looked at my mother, Susan, expecting her to reprimand Jessica, expecting her to show a shred of maternal instinct for her sick granddaughter, but Susan just nodded in agreement, looking at me with a demanding, hardened glare. "Your sister is right, Emily," Susan said coldly. "We need to talk about business, and we don't have much time." Jessica stepped closer to me, her eyes locking onto mine with an unbelievable amount of entitlement. "Look, my 30th birthday is coming up next month," she said, leaning in as if she were talking about a routine favor. "All of my high society friends from Dallas and Houston are expecting something massive. I've already planned out everything: a gorgeous weekend luxury yacht trip off the coast, a private catering service, and a week-long stay at an elite 5-star resort. The problem is, the deposit is due by tomorrow morning, and Robert's accounts are temporarily tight. We know you and Daniel have been hoarding cash. We know you have exactly $70,000 sitting in a bank account right now. I need you to transfer that money to my account immediately so I can secure the yacht." I stood there completely paralyzed. The room fell into a suffocating, horrific silence, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical beep, beep, beep of Lily's heart monitor. I looked at my mother. "Mom, did you hear what she just said?" I whispered, my voice shaking with a mixture of absolute horror and profound grief. "You think I'm hoarding cash? That money isn't a savings account. It's Lily's life-saving fund. Daniel and I sold our car, mortgaged our home, and sold my engagement ring to scrape that together. It is the exact amount we need for her specialized bone marrow treatment next week. Without it, my daughter will die." Jessica rolled her eyes, letting out a disgusted groan. "Oh, come on, Emily. Don't be so incredibly dramatic," she hissed, stepping right into my personal space. "She's just a kid, and she's already in a hospital. Who's to say that money will even work? You've always been like this, always ruining my special moments, always putting your own little problems above the rest of the family. This is my 30th birthday. I've been planning this for a year. You are not going to embarrass me in front of my friends just because you want to be a martyr for a sick child." My blood ran cold. The sheer, unfathomable cruelty of the words coming out of my sister's mouth felt like a physical blow to my chest. I looked at Susan, my mother, waiting for her to stop this madness, waiting for her to show a single shred of human decency. But Susan just crossed her arms and glared at me. "Emily, don't be difficult," my mother said, her voice completely flat. "Jessica's reputation is on the line. You can always make more money or get another loan. Your sister needs this now." In that exact second, something snapped deep inside my soul. The helpless, desperate little girl who had spent 32 years begging for these people to love her died right then and there. I stepped forward, my posture hardening, my voice dropping to a deadly, lethal whisper. "Get out," I said, pointing a trembling but firm finger toward the door. "Get out of this room before I call security. You are not human beings. You are monsters. I wouldn't give you a single dollar if it meant saving your own lives, let alone for a disgusting, pathetic yacht party. My daughter is fighting for her life, and you mean absolutely nothing to me. Leave now." Jessica's face twisted into an ugly, animalistic rage. She had never in her entire life been told no. The golden child was losing her mind because her perfect, spoiled world was being threatened by the sister she had always looked down upon. "You selfish, miserable bitch!" Jessica screamed, her voice piercing through the quiet oncology ward. "You've always tried to steal my spotlight. You care more about this brat than your own blood family." "Jessica, stop it!" I yelled, stepping between her and the bed, trying to shield my sleeping daughter. But Jessica was completely blind with fury. She lost all control. She lunged forward, bypassing me, and her eyes landed on the heavy, medical-grade blood pressure monitor resting on the rolling metal stand right next to Lily's bed. Before I could even process what she was doing, Jessica gripped the heavy machine with both hands, lifted it into the air, and with a look of pure, unadulterated malice, she hurled it straight down at my defenseless, sleeping 10-year-old child. A horrific, sickening thud echoed through the room. The heavy plastic and metal corner of the monitor struck Lily squarely on the side of her fragile head. Lily's eyes flew open, and a piercing, blood-curdling shriek of pure agony ripped from her throat. It was a sound that will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. Within seconds, a dark, crimson wave of blood began to gush from her temple, spilling across her pale cheek and soaking into the pristine, white hospital sheets. The impact caused the delicate IV lines to rip from her arm, and instantly, the cardiac and vitals monitors began to wail with a continuous, deafening alarm. "Lily!" I screamed, a raw, animalistic cry tearing from my lungs. I threw my entire body over my daughter, pulling her into my arms, pressing my hands hard against her bleeding head to stop the flow. She was shaking, crying, throwing up from the sheer pain and shock. I looked back at Jessica, who was standing there breathing heavily, a smug, venomous smirk still lingering on her lips. She had done it on purpose. She wanted to hurt me, so she targeted my dying child. The continuous, high-pitched shrieks of the medical monitors filled the room as the heavy wooden door burst open. 3 nurses and a pediatric doctor rushed in, their faces turning pale with shock at the sight of the blood on the bed. 2 heavily built hospital security guards stepped in right behind them. "She attacked my daughter!" I screamed through my tears, keeping my hands pressed against Lily's bleeding head. "She threw the monitor at her! Call the police! Call 911 right now!" Jessica's smug smirk instantly vanished as the 2 security guards lunged forward, grabbing her arms and pinning her against the wall. She began to struggle, kicking and screaming like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. "Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, her voice echoing down the hallway. Susan immediately scrambled forward, trying to push the guards away from her favorite child. "This is a misunderstanding. It was just an accident," Susan yelled, her voice trembling as she pointed an accusing finger at me. "My daughter slipped. Emily is lying. She's trying to frame her own sister." Within 10 minutes, 3 Austin police officers stormed into the room, their handcuffs rattling. Susan immediately ran to them, crying crocodile tears, spinning a web of disgusting lies about how the heavy monitor had just accidentally fallen over during a family argument. But I didn't say a word to Susan. I looked directly at the lead officer, my voice cold and steady, despite the tears streaming down my face. "Officer, there is a high-definition security camera mounted directly outside that door, looking straight through the glass panel. There are 3 medical staff members who heard the threats, and my daughter's blood is all over that machine." The officers didn't hesitate. They reviewed the immediate hallway footage, took the statements of the horrified nurses, and looked at the heavy, blood-stained monitor. Right there, In front of my eyes, they pulled Jessica's arms behind her back and slammed the metal handcuffs onto her wrists. As they dragged her out of the oncology ward in tears, Susan ran after them, screaming that she would sue the city. When the case went to the Austin District Court, I made sure there was no mercy. I hired the most aggressive criminal prosecutor in Texas and handed over every piece of evidence, including the flawless hospital surveillance footage that showed Jessica deliberately lifting and throwing the machine at a sleeping cancer patient. When the judge viewed the video, his face hardened with absolute disgust. He looked down from his bench at a weeping Jessica, declared her actions to be an act of unmitigated, malicious savagery against a defenseless child, completely denied her bail, and sentenced her to several years in a maximum security state prison. Watching Jessica get dragged away to a prison cell was only the beginning of the karma that awaited my parents. Robert and Susan refused to accept reality. Driven by their toxic obsession with their golden child, they spent the next several months frantically trying to appeal the sentence. They hired elite, high-priced criminal defense attorneys, pouring every single dollar of their savings into a hopeless legal battle. When that wasn't enough, they liquidated their retirement accounts, maxed out multiple credit cards, and sold their luxury vehicles. Finally, in a desperate attempt to pay the mounting legal fees, they put their beloved suburban Austin home on the market and sold it for a fraction of its worth. But the evidence I provided was ironclad. No amount of money could buy Jessica's freedom, and her sentence remained completely unchanged. The financial wreckage completely destroyed Robert and Susan. With no assets, no home, and buried under a mountain of debt, they were forced into bankruptcy, ending up entirely homeless and relying on the charity of distant relatives who despised them for what they had allowed Jessica to do. Meanwhile, our universe began to heal. The money we saved remained safely in Lily's medical account. Thanks to the incredible medical team, her specialized bone marrow therapy was a flawless success. After months of grueling treatment, the doctors walked into her room with tears in their eyes and officially announced that Lily was in complete, total remission. The cancer was gone. A year later, Daniel, Lily, and I were sitting in the living room of our new home when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Robert and Susan standing on my porch. They were unrecognizable, haggard, dressed in worn clothes, weeping openly as they begged me for forgiveness and asked if they could stay with us. I looked at the people who had abandoned me, who had demanded my child's life-saving money for a yacht party, and who had defended a monster. My voice was as cold as ice as I spoke my final words to them. We are not family. The day you allowed Jessica to strike my dying daughter was the day you became absolute strangers to me. Never come back. I slammed the door in their faces, locking out their toxic past forever, and turned back to my beautiful, healthy daughter and husband, finally free.